Hello, friends. Welcome. I hope you're ready for what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss just practical tips. Lou, how are you?
Very good. I'm very interested, and the subject matter interests me. So, I'm looking forward to seeing what we have here today.
Yeah, in one of our previous episodes, I mentioned that somebody had written to me and said, all of this theory about the Gita is very well and good, but how do I apply it in my regular life? And I was thinking that I have so many notes to myself as I was growing and learning to myself about practical tips that if I start talking about that, it becomes a lot more interesting, I think, than theory itself. The theory
Right.
of going verse after verse after verse becomes somewhat repetitious, maybe boring after a while, and you don't want to do it. So if I give you too many of these, then you won't want to learn the about the chapters and the verses, which is very necessary. So I'm trying to give you a lot more of that and less of these practical tips. But here's one episode that we'll do on practical tips, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So I have made some notes and I will refer to them as we go along. But life, from the moment you're born to the moment you die, is a series of experiences. In Sanskrit is known as Anubhava Dhara. Anubhav is experience and Dhar means stream. So it's life is a stream of experiences. Every millisecond you have an experience. And that experience, if you're from the moment you open your eyes, actually even before, when you're dreaming, you're having an experience. When you're deep sleeping, you're having an experience. From the moment you open your eyes, you look, you're having an experience. You're experiencing something, whether it is that you're looking at the ceiling or something else. Those experiences then lead to action. You wake up, you open your eyes, you experience the smell of coffee from downstairs. You say, oh, somebody's making a fresh cup of coffee. You swing your legs out of bed. That's an action. You get up, you go rush to the bathroom, quickly brush your teeth. That's an action. All of these actions are so that you can fulfill your desires to go downstairs and have a cup of coffee. I hope you're with me so far.
Mm-hmm.
So, action says we all have to act. You have to act. You cannot, even if you're sitting in the Himalayas, you cannot be without action. That action could be motionless, even. It doesn't have to be movement, but we all have to act. We cannot stay without action. Action is determined and dictated by only two things. Bear with me. Only two things: the mind and the buddhi or intellect. To understand this, we have to understand what the mind does and its qualities, and what the buddhi does and its qualities. Action is also because you think that something is missing, right? You wake up, you say, I'm missing the taste of coffee. I'm missing coffee in my system. And you think that by doing that action, that missing thing will be obtained. So by swinging your legs off the bed, by walking, brushing your teeth, and rushing downstairs, that missing coffee will be obtained. So the action is designed so that you will get that action. Okay? Now, we have physical senses, the five senses and the five organs of action, the mind with emotions, intellect or buddhi, and Atman. That much we know. The physical senses are the most gross, right? And the least pleasurable. As much as you may think that that gives you the most pleasure, it's actually the least pleasurable. It will only go so far as the physical body can go. So
Right.
if you're in a jail cell, for instance, you're locked in, there's bars in the front and three walls behind you, you are limited to going within the jail. Your physical body is limited to that. Your taste is limited to whatever is inside that jail cell. Your hearing is limited to whatever comes into the jail cell, etc. The least pleasure. So if you were to measure it in terms of light, you would say this is one candle, okay? On a scale, that's one candle. The mind has emotions. It's less gross than the physical body or the physical senses, has a little more pleasure than even the body. And you can imagine this. And the mind controls the body, right? The
Yes.
mind has greater impact or power over the body. The body cannot control the mind controls the body. It can go beyond a room or a jail cell. and beyond physical restraints. But only it can only go to something it knows from before. For instance, if I'm sitting in the jail cell, I'm physically restrained, but my mind can say, "Oh, remember that vacation I had on the beaches of such and such a place? It was such a nice." I can actually imagine and remember smelling the salt air and tasting that beautiful coconut water, etc. The mind can go beyond the physical restraints. So it can control the body, and we've talked about this before, where when the body is not well, the mind can actually dictate how it feels and bring itself out of illness, etc., but only to what it knows from before. So the first one was physical senses, was a candle. This one would be a bulb, like a light bulb. Next one is intellect or buddhi. It is the least gross of the three, subtle, has even more pleasure than the mind or the body. It controls both the mind and the body. And the mind and the body, if your intellect is strong enough, are required to listen to and obey the intellect. It can go where it has never been before by imagination. So, where the mind could say, "I've been to the beaches of Goa or Cancun and I loved it." But if you say, "Have you been to such and such a planet?" He says, "No." Can you imagine what it would look like? The mind cannot. The intellect can. If you describe it, the intellect can actually think of what it might be like. So, first one was candle, second one is a bulb. This one becomes a chandelier, the intellect. And the Atman, which is the subtlest, which gives you the most superior pleasure compared to all of these above, controls everything below, including the intellect. And that is in the scriptures said to be the sun. So all of this refers again to the actions. Now, when you talk about action, you can talk about action by the mind, which is you feel like something, doing something, therefore you do it. I feel like having coffee, my emotions, my desire for coffee, so I get out of bed and rush downstairs to have coffee. Action by intellect is you understand why you have to do something, therefore you do it. You may not even want to do it, but you ought to do it, so you do it. There's a difference. For an action to be ideal, here's what you need to underline and understand. For an action to be ideal, an ideal action, it has to have two main components. One, the action itself must generate energy. Okay? The action itself must generate energy. And number two, the energy thus generated must not be dissipated. So you have a bucket, let's say, and you're turn the faucet and water is pouring into the bucket, but there's three holes in the bucket. As the bucket is filling, is being dissipated. This energy that's coming into the bucket is being dissipated through the three holes on the bottom of the bucket.
Right.
So let's say the body again, the action on behalf of the body generates energy. So you know that when you are doing exercise, that's acting. And as you exercise, you generate energy. You get dynamic. Otherwise, you stagnate. Somebody who's just sitting on the couch the whole time is not generating energy, he becomes stagnant and he becomes obese, and his heart doesn't function too well. But the person who's exercising feels energetic and becomes stronger. So he's generating energy. He meets the first criteria, that it has to generate energy and it must not be dissipated. We'll get to that. The mind, you think, you analyze, your mind is dynamic, sharp. But when you're doing this, your mind must not be selfish. It must surrender to a higher cause. You must renounce all self centered interest. A higher ideal is necessary. A cause will give you more energy when you're doing something for a higher cause than yourself, for other people, for society, for your community. It gives you more energy instead of just saying, "I'm doing it for self-centered, for material benefits, for wealth, for power, for fame." By doing it for a higher cause, you will guaranteed also get more energy, you'll get more money, you'll get more fame, but you shouldn't be looking for it, nor should you be glad that you got it. Otherwise, it's all for naught. Intellect, with this, you maintain a constant awareness of your purpose when you're doing the action. So we talked about the faucet, water coming in, and the three holes in the bucket. What are those three holes in the bucket? One, your mind goes into the future. Your mind says, well, if I get this, I will be, you think of the fruits, the rewards, the benefits to you. And therefore, you have anxiety that you might not get that fruit, right? You've
Right.
heard of many people who are about to make a world record. If they just do this one last home run, right, or beat somebody else's record, and when he's standing to bat at that time, he's so anxious that if he hits that, he's going to hit a home run, he's going to beat somebody's record, that he messes up just at that time. Why? Because of that one hole in the bucket where he's so eager to get that reward that he becomes anxious and he's not concentrating fully. So that's the first hole. Don't allow that energy to be dissipated by thoughts of the future. That's the first. The second is mind slips into the past. You said, oh, last time I was up to bat and I almost hit it, but I lost it. And I lost it. So because of your worries about past misfortunes or past deeds, it saps your energy. So it drains out of that second. Worries about the future, worries about the past. And the third is your mind gets excited. Jwara, it's called, it's fever, mental fever, excitement about the action itself. You get so worked up, so excited that about what you have to do that your performance is not the best. You could have done better, but you don't do as good because
Right.
of worry about the performance. Now, not even for a moment can you give up action because stagnation causes destructions. You will act according to your own gunas. We talked about gunas before in earlier chapters where you say you have sattvic guna, which is equanimous. You have rajasic, full of dynamism and action, but always self centered and craving and desire ridden. And the last is tamasic. So, one is you have to act. The two, you're made to act according to your own gunas. You make yourself act according to that. Number three, but as you act to fulfill your desires, you are creating more desires, right?
Mhm.
And we've talked about this, but I'll mention it again. You're constantly creating more vasanas. Therefore, with the vasanas and desires, you create more sorrow because more desires which are unfulfilled means more sorrow.
Right.
How does that work? Sorry if I'm going over this, you know it already, but for those who may not have heard this before, I have a desire for something that I experienced before and I had a good time with it. I liked it. And so my sense organs, my mind says, I want to do that again. The second time I do it, I can either be just as satisfied as I was the first time, or more satisfied, or less satisfied. Either way, it creates more desires.
Right.
Because if I'm just as satisfied as the last time, you say, look, now I had two great experiences with this chocolate ice cream. It was the same both times. Now I want it another time. A week later, you say, I want that same thing because both times I had it before, it was delicious.
Right.
Or the second time, it was more delicious. This chocolate ice cream is even better than the first time. So the third time, you say, a week later, you say, I want to have that. The first time was good, second time was better. I want to eat it again. Or it wasn't as good on the second time. So you say, first time was fantastic, second time was not as good. Let me try again. I want it. Either way, with any of these occurrences, that one desire that you had the first time to eat the ice cream and the second time to eat the ice cream, you're only creating more desires, more vasanas, therefore more sorrow and less happiness. Number four, and this is important for many cultures, religions, etc., to know. If you physically stop the organs of action, the mind keeps thinking of the sense objects and the desires. So the desires keep building up because it's the mental action towards the objects that causes the desires.
Right.
So there, there are some religious people who will say, you know what, I have to be celibate. I can't. get married. I can't be with a person of the opposite sex. I have to
Mhm.
control my desires. They're not ready for it. If they're not ready for it, what happens? They're physically, that's what we were just saying. You're physically restraining your organs of action and your mind, but it doesn't stop the desires. The desires keep running away with themselves. And as a result, this person gets into trouble because they come out in a different way. Whatever desires, whether they be for sexual objects or for food or for anything, they just come out in different ways. You have to allow yourself, especially with those that have to do with what I was saying, the organs of action. You have to allow yourself to allow themselves some ventilation so that they don't build up and come out
Right.
in. And the last one is, so either way the desires multiply, whether you indulge or you restrain, the desires keep multiplying. So essentially, what you've got to do is to try and come to the bottom of why you have these desires. And that is where the Gita comes up to say, let me talk about what exactly are these desires, where do they come from, etc. Um, Next, exercise. You've got to put it in your calendar because, as we said, we've got to work exercise. Your body cannot be allowed to decay. Your mind cannot be allowed to decay. It's got to be active all the time. Make it a routine. 3 times a week, you've got to at least walk briskly so that you break a sweat, so that your heart rate goes up, or do some aerobic exercises or weights. Manage your money, manage your bills. Um, People often, I see this with many families, they take off their clothes when they're changing and they just throw them on the floor. At that time, pick them up, fold them, put them away, put them in the wash, whatever it is that you're doing. Don't just throw them on the floor. There's a story of Krishna when I think I've told you this story before, right, Lou? Do you remember it?
With the shoes?
With the shoes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
So, they had a party at the end of the Mahabharata war, and everybody had some task. And Krishna volunteered. He said, I'll take care of everybody's shoes outside the palace when they come in. And the party was going on, and all the guests were not inside the house. Everybody wondered, where are the guests? They went out looking for them, and they found that they were all admiring Krishna's taking care of the shoes. He had taken care of everybody's shoes, put them so neatly, arranged them that everybody was just standing there in wonderment. And the motto of that is that even if, as great a person as you are, whatever you do, even if it's aligning people's shoes, do it so that people admire you. Not for the admiration, but it should be done so well that it's worthy of admiration. That you should do even tasks such as laying out shoes in a good way and follow that example. Or that you're so powerful, like you're self realized, like Krishna, and you shouldn't feel that it's below your dignity to do something like this. Um, okay, what else can I talk to you about here?
Can I talk
Oh,
to you about desires for a second?
yes.
I it I found it interesting while we were talking about that is it's not necessarily about denying desires, it's about dealing with them. It's, as we talked earlier, it's okay to have desires, it's not okay to be attached to them, and practical in day-to-day life, I remember, thinking with my kids, them having a credit card or a debit card, and it's not keeping that from them, that's the correct way to go about it, it's teaching them how to deal with it instead. So, you talked about priests who deny desire. Denying desire isn't the way to go about it because that never works. They can't be defeated that way. You just learn how to deal with them and not become attached and manage them properly.
Yeah. So when I was going through this initially, I had the same questions to say, well, how do you control desires? If in fact you know that whatever it is, the physical desire, indulging in it gives you pleasure, how do you stop yourself from thinking about it in the future? And the one way to do it is to stop what is called lingering. And lingering means if I go into a restaurant and I have a delicious meal and I come outside and all I do is to keep thinking about that meal, talking about the meal, describing it to other people, and saying what a good meal that was, that is being carved into my brain as a vritti, at vritti is being carved in to say, look, the more lingering I have to say, oh my God, that was fantastic. That was so good. That was great. It is being carved in and out so that it will keep coming. The best way to do this is if you know that you have a desire, that your body cannot control itself just by saying, I can't, then you have to allow yourself to indulge in the desire within reason, of course. Don't use this for anything. Within reason, you allow yourself to fulfill that desire. But the minute you've done that, you push it out of your mind as much as possible. Just keep not thinking about it. We'll try to keep coming back because that's how the mind is, to say, let's fulfill this desire again. Let's go back there again. Let's do this again. And you have to be able to not linger on it. That's really what you have to do. And again, when you're doing an action, don't focus on the fruit, because then you can't focus on the action.
You just described the three holes in the bucket of energy that you talked about, where you're living in the past, remembering how good that desire was the last time you had it. You're living in the future, thinking about how happy you're going to be when you get that desire again, or your mind is worked up. You're very excited about how good it was and how much you want it. Those are the three drains of energy you just mentioned. It's about living in the moment, and it's about not dwelling on the past pleasure, or anticipating what the future pleasure will be. Take what's in front of you.
So people have, that's the raw generator of these desires is the vasanas.
Mhm.
The vasanas you can't see, you can't. They're the cause of. They're the cause of why we're even here on this earth today. From the vasanas come the desires. The desires you can actually perceive. You can see them. You can not see them, but you can know that they're there.
Right.
Those desires, the raw desire for something, then gets transposed into different kinds of desires like anger, greed, arrogance, jealousy, delusion, fear. And we've talked about this, but just anger. You have a desire for something, and somebody else comes and takes it away from you or blocks you from fulfilling your desire. What happens? You develop anger.
Mhm.
And I wanted to have that cup of coffee downstairs. I quickly jumped out of bed. I brushed my teeth. I rushed downstairs, and I found that this guest that my somebody had brought in had stayed over last night, and he just drank the last cup of coffee, finished the whole pot. And I look at him. I introduced myself. I said, "This is my home," and he says, "Oh, I'm such and such's guest. I came here." So I came down to have some coffee. He says, "Oh, I just finished it." I said,
Uh,
okay, make myself another pot. He said, no, there's no more coffee beans left. Now my desire for coffee turns into anger. My desire for coffee turns into anger towards him for having finished that coffee. So, so we've talked about in the past how desire gets changed into greed or fear or anxiety or arrogance, jealousy, all of these things. Bottom line is you can't eliminate the vasanas, but you can eliminate the desires. You can. And that's a very, very important part. The last thing I want to talk about is donations,
mhm.
which is in Sanskrit known as dana. Dan or donation, we think that by giving money to somebody or writing a check is the only form of donation that we know. The scriptures say that that is the lowest form. It's still a form of donation. No, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but it's the lowest form of donation. Why? Because it's at the level of the body. You're giving wealth, which is enough to help somebody, but you could do more. The next higher level is physical sweat. You are actually saying, listen, you are homeless. I can give you money to get a house. I can actually work with you to build yourself a house, to build your house. And I actually get up, roll up my sleeves, and go there regularly to use hammer, nails, and build them a house. The next level is with your mind. You're showing emotions. You're sharing your emotions. You're helping with love and compassion. That is the next higher level of donation. The next one, higher than that, is knowledge, intellectual, where you're teaching somebody how to conduct himself, how to earn a living. You're teaching him how to fish instead of handing him a fish. And that is the next higher level. And the last one is teaching somebody the road to spiritual self realization. spiritual betterment. If
Mhm.
you can teach somebody that, again, all of these donations are without any return. You should not, when you give something, a check, money, you try and do it anonymously without any return to yourself. And if you can do this with those levels, then you're doing a true donation. There's much more to be said about donations and feelings. Shankaracharya has written a lot about it. There's a lot written in the Tattva Bodha, and maybe we can talk about it some more sometime. But
That's giving away the most secret teachings, right? That's what we talked about in the last episode. It's the most precious thing you can give, donating a person, moving them to its self-realization.
yeah, and correct, Lou, thank you. Yes, because the more you give them of this spiritual thing, because that is the source of all happiness, the source of laughter, the source of lack of anxiety, no fear. You're giving them the best gift you could give them. So these are practical tips. I hope you like what we talked about, and we will see you next time. We'll be starting on chapter 16. Hope you join us.